Hey, welcome! So today, we're going to dive into something pretty wild, a hidden link between the laws that make planets spin and the rules that make your savings account grow. Now, I know that sounds like a stretch, but stick with me because by the end of this, you're going to see your money in a whole new light.
When you think about it, physics and economics feel like they're from completely different universes, right? Physics is all about the real world, the motion of things you can touch, stuff like force, mass, and velocity. Economics, on the other hand, it's about the abstract world of money, interest, capital, growth. They seem to speak entirely different languages. But what if they don't?
And that really brings us to the big question for today. What in the world does the physics of a spinning wheel have to do with the economics of a savings account? Well, it turns out there's a secret, shared geometry connecting them. And to uncover it, we have to start with one really basic idea.
Okay, so to crack this puzzle, we first need to make sure we're all on the same page about one key concept, capital. It's a word we throw around all the time, but for our purposes, its specific meaning is absolutely crucial.
First off, let's be clear about what capital is not. It is not a commodity. A commodity like, say, an apple, has value because you can use it up. You eat it, and poof, it's gone. You got value out of it, but that's the end of the story.
Capital, however, is a whole different beast. You don't consume it directly. The classic example is a piece of farmland. You can't eat the dirt, right? Its value comes from what it can produce, the crops you grow on it. So capital isn't something you use up. It's something that works for you to create more value.
And what's really cool is how this idea pops up everywhere. Land is capital that produces crops. A factory machine is capital that produces goods. A flock of chickens is capital that produces a return. Eggs. And of course, in the world of finance, the money in your bank account, your principal, that's capital that produces interest. See the pattern? You have a stable base, the capital, and the return it generates, the product.
So, this relationship between a stable base and the return it kicks off, that's the key. And to really see this relationship clearly, we have to throw out our old way of thinking about graphs, with the classic X and Y axes. We need a totally new kind of map. We literally need to shift our perspective. We need to stop thinking in flat grids and start thinking in circles. Instead of charting things on a grid, let's start picturing a fixed point in the center and then a rotation around it. This is where the geometry really starts to click into place. We're going to borrow a tool from math called polar coordinates. And in our new economic map, your capital, whether it's land, a machine, or your bank balance, is a fixed line stretching out from the center, kind of like the radius of a circle. And the product it generates, the crops, the goods, the interest, we're going to represent that as a rotation, an angle moving around that central point.
Now here's where it gets really amazing. Once you start looking at the economy through this new geometric lens, a powerful pattern just emerges. It turns out that almost all financial activity can be described by one of three fundamental shapes.
Let's kick things off with the simplest shape of all, a straight line. This represents the most basic kind of production, the steady, predictable kind where nothing really changes. So in this first model, the capital base is totally fixed. It's stable. Think back to that plot of land. It doesn't get bigger or smaller, and every single year it produces a steady, predictable amount of crops. If you were to plot this over time, it would just be a flat, constant line of output. Your capital radius stays the same, and the rotational speed is perfectly constant. All right, let's move on to our second shape. This is the circle, and it describes a process I bet you're pretty familiar with, even if you don't use this word for it: amortization.
Amortization is what happens when your capital actually gets used up, or dies off, as it creates its product. The word itself comes from mort, meaning death. A great real-world example is that flock of chickens. The chickens, the capital, lay eggs, which is the product. But the chickens also get old and die. So to keep the whole thing going, some of those eggs have to be used to hatch new chickens, just to replenish the capital. It's this self-consuming, regenerating cycle.
A home mortgage is exactly the same motion. The loan principal is the bank's capital. Every month, your payment gets split in two. Part of it is interest. That's the product. But the other part pays down the principal, which means the capital base is shrinking. You're slowly killing off the debt. This motion, where the capital base shrinks all the way back to zero, traces a perfect circular path in our geometric model. And that finally brings us to our third and honestly most powerful shape, the hyperbola. This is the shape of explosive, accelerating growth. This happens when the product isn't taken out and spent. Instead, it gets plowed right back into the original capital. Think about a savings account with compounding interest. The interest you earn isn't just a payout, it gets added back to your principal. So now your capital base is bigger, which means next time it earns even more interest. It's a feedback loop that creates accelerating growth.
This is the magic of compounding. Your capital generates a return. That return makes the capital bigger. The bigger capital then generates an even bigger return, and on it goes. Unlike the circle of amortization, which spirals back to zero, this shape curves outward, expanding forever. This is the pure geometry of building wealth.
Okay, let's take a breath. We've got three totally different motions: a steady line, a shrinking circle, and an expanding hyperbola. They describe simple production, paying off a loan, and growing your savings. How on earth could these three things possibly be related?
This is the moment it all comes together. It seems completely impossible that these three distinct shapes, representing three totally different financial realities, could all spring from the very same source. But believe it or not, they do.
The connection is this beautiful idea from math called the exponential map. The best way to think of it is like a single master recipe for motion. If you just follow the basic recipe, you get a straight line. But if you add a special kind of mathematical ingredient, that same recipe suddenly produces a perfect circle. And if you add a different special ingredient, it produces that expanding hyperbola. It's one single universal formula that generates all three of our financial shapes. It's the secret code that ties them all together.
So look, this is way more than just a neat math trick. This whole model gives us a profoundly different and I think much more intuitive way to understand how money really moves and behaves. So why does all this matter? Well, because it gives you an incredibly powerful new way to actually see your own financial life. The steady, linear production from your job, the circular motion of paying off your mortgage, and the explosive, hyperbolic growth of your retirement savings, they aren't separate things. They are all just different expressions of the same deep geometric law. Now, you can literally picture it. Is your money moving in a straight line? Is it cycling back to zero? Or is it launching outward on that powerful hyperbola of growth?
This incredible connection between the physics of motion and the flow of money just goes to show that the fundamental patterns of the universe can pop up in the most unexpected places. And it leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. What other laws of nature are out there, hiding in plain sight right inside our economy?